To kick off our program today, we have David Wagoner, and I will go ahead and read to you an introduction. He is a principal in the firm of Wagoner and Ball Architects in New Orleans. David has led projects of various kinds, including award-winning designs in planning, restoration, and renovation categories, just to name a few. He also has experience in post-Katrina planning exercises as a lead in creating the St. Bernard Parish Plan and was part of the Unified New Orleans Plan. He served on the board and architectural review committee of the Preservation Resource Alliance, the historic Faubourg St. Mary Corporation, the Louisiana Preservation Alliance, the Garden District Association, and Smart Growth Louisiana. David has taught architectural design at Tulane and at the University of Oregon. He is a fellow of American Institute of Architects, a member of the Association for Preservation Technology, and the Society of Architectural Historians. He also was involved in initiating the Dutch Dialogues workshops, which was an outgrowth of the extended interactions between Dutch engineers, urban designers, landscape architects, city planners, and soils hydrology experts, and many of their counterparts here in Louisiana. So I will turn it over to David.
So thank you for having me. As I was introduced, I'm David Wagoner with hopefully a progressive identity. You know, the cliches of flood's a terrible thing to waste. It's a truth, but it's a hard truth. The situation that happened in New Orleans 8 years ago was not one we saw coming. We knew that it was possible to fill up that bowl, but not the extent of devastation. And the after effect of that, with all the brokenness, with all the emptiness, you have to look at starkly. Now, if you reset the city as the city was, if you know the pattern of New Orleans in decline, if you say that this is okay and there's not some possibility of something better and different coming out of this remade landscape, then I think you really are asleep already. The population loss, you know, was stark, and now New Orleans is stabilized and growing a little bit. Comparative population, maybe you know that Atlanta's having some problems with its own population. But this is a question of cities. So one city's not different from another in entirety, although those cities that prosper differentiate themselves. There are those who would say that the future of New Orleans is Venice, with the water lapping against the buildings, up a little higher or quite a bit higher than it's supposed to be. People at leisure, you know, alongside the water, comfortable as the inevitability slips into somebody else's lifetime, but soon, but comfortable in this beautiful malaise. There are other pictures of the future that are even more stark, you know, and the Chinese have visualized this. You can walk on the floor of the library in Alexandria underwater. But New Orleans has, you know, had this huge investment to protect itself. We, the country, have made an investment in protecting New Orleans. And so where are we now with this prospect? Because this investment in a flood infrastructure that's of only limited numerical value, actuarial value, has to be reinforced with a lot more than that. It's interesting, though, that the different places react differently to disaster, even small ones. So, you know, Copenhagen is a world leader as an urban case. They have a flood in 2011, and it wasn't something that we don't see fairly regularly in New Orleans, okay? But they say, okay, that means we have to change. That means we have to put these different things in actions. We have to map our risk. We'll incorporate the rainfall and the storm surge. And this is going to be good because adaptation is opportunity. And if there's anything that Louisiana has got to get its mind around, it's that adaptation is opportunity. Things are going to change. What can we do with them? Well, we also have to look at levels of investment that are smart and that have a return, because these are economic questions also. And so if you start, this is Copenhagen, and put forward quickly just to tell you that other places are quicker than we are. Other places are higher up and in a stronger economic position than we are. But the principles are similar. The catchment, where is the water, where does it run? What are we going to do about it? We're going to have to get water out of this traditional sewer system and put it in a blue-green layer that's in between. So they have looked throughout their city at creating this layer of infrastructure. They've worked in each of the catchments with their properties and with their people to look at the opportunities. This has been done by the municipality. This has not been done by an outsider, as I have been doing this. But, you see that green space in the middle, and well, that's, Canal Boulevard neutral ground, if any of you know New Orleans. And then it would be very wet. But that is better to be wet than the houses and buildings. Or you look at this street, and you see where it would be filling up, but not the buildings. So safe to flood is what they are trying to create. Rotterdam has been the driver of a lot of our effort. They did a water plan, and you see that's version 2. What I'm going to show you is our version 1. New Orleans has joined this group of Delta cities. This is a knowledge exchange network of some value. There are different problems in different places, and there are many places that aren't on this list that we learn from, like Singapore. So this is a big body of work we've been doing. It's now put forward. You can see it online, Living with Water. There'll be a reference again at the end. But, we have a vision document. We also have system document. How does the more engineered system work? How do you implement this? And then what does it look like in urban form? So those are separated documents. It was a big team. I have to give credit for that. I stand here, speak often for the team. And the intelligence of the team shouldn't ever be underestimated. It's not the individuals. But the team is a broader team. The team in New Orleans is all of us. The team in Louisiana should be all of us. Who's the participant in the parade? Everybody is a participant in the parade. The question of New Orleans becoming a water city is the fundamental of this. I use and will be using the idea of building America's water city as New Orleans. Some people take that as negative, as you could see from the Chinese meat image underwater. This came out of the Dutch dialogues process that we did with the Dutch government and with the APA. Had a lot of support. The basic focus was to look at urban water, look inside the levee, because the strategies given here for inside the levee are inadequate, elevate and evacuate. We also know, and please understand that we're not ignoring or not thinking forward to the coastal question and the lines of defense. Those are invaluable, have to be activated. But if you go back into the city itself, the illusion that this city sits there on hardscape and stands above the water's within the city. The water's pressing down under the city. And if you don't balance that water under the city, you're destined to doom. So the planning approach we have is a ground-up approach, and it means ground up in the simple terms of a kid from Plain Dealing, Louisiana, which I can't be in Baton Rouge and not call back, which is where I am from. So it also has something to do with, I think about a friend of mine who's a banker from Plain Dealing, but with Chase and runs the New York commercial loan. How do you spend your money? He's better at it than I am. But how do we spend our money? Are we going to continue to just spend our money on things? Are we going to start thinking about where our return on investment is and where we can get something in the next generation? We identified, I think these probably showed up yesterday, Rami was telling me, flooding is a problem. No doubt. We had the highest repetitive loss ratio in the country, irrespective of Katrina. Subsidence, which is this problem that nobody seems to realize we can manage. And then this strange relationship to water where it's a terrible thing. Improved safety is an opportunity. Jefferson Parish built Pontiff Park with a little levee around it to do that. Economic vitality is a goal, because economic vitality is what's going to allow us to continue to invest again, stay here, grow. And then really we don't do it for economics, we do it for life. And so this is Big Lake in City Park. We made a case in this document that there's money to be saved, that is, same as made almost, $8 billion worth of projected flooding in the next 50 years without extremes of climate change. And then if we do these things that we're talking about within our model, you see the reduction of the blue in there and the diminution of flooding. These are not with the most extensive measures either. But then if you think about the subsidence and the cost of that and the way it's tearing up your infrastructure all the time, it's tearing up your houses and eventually ruins your pilings and therefore your buildings, that's $2.2 billion worth of projected losses that we can avoid. So we look then to avoid that through the landscape types. This is a sort of a landscape repair project. It's not depending on engineering to the degree that we in the past have depended on engineering. It looks in this soil, in these soil strata, wherever you are, whether you're in Donaldsonville or Baker or New Orleans, what is the soil underneath? Because along the river, it varies. And it changes the paradigm. So the paradigm shifts from this pump it, every drop of water that falls we have to pump, to one that says every drop of water that falls we need to store until it overruns and we have to pump it out. The Europeans say we have to store every drop of water that falls. You don't find Louisiana politicians saying that. So the strategies then work with what it is, because I'm I want to be a good architect. I work in New Orleans and want to be a participant there. We renovate with what we have. We work from what we have. We renovate the system here. We don't throw it away. We build with it. So the SELA projects are incorporated but reversed with pump to the river. And then we look at these flows, because you have to have a circulating system. You have to have a flowing system. And so the outfall eventually is still there because the rainfall quantity is too much to store. And then the catch is that in climate change, with climate adaptation strategy, you have to have a dry system too. So you have to be able to bring the water into the landscape to manage the subsidence in the dry periods. So it's a system that flows both ways, in and out. And it's quantified and it aggregates to be a living system, so that alongside and within the water are beneficial species, okay? Trees included. Reiterating, the Dutch on the stock exchange, I don't want to leave this out, cost before benefits. So we say, and the Dutch come back to this, we have $6 billion projected cost, 22 plus in projected benefits on conservative basis. The Dutch come up to me after a talk about 10 days ago and say, well, that means you're going to do it, right? No, it's not that easy in America, is it? So what are we going to do about it? We got to think forward, and we got to lead into this. I mean, one of the things, the reason this is in here, other than reminding us all that none of that included ecological diversity, the value of ecosystem benefits. We do not quantify the value of the ecosystem. And in Louisiana, we must quantify that, because the ecosystem is what is so rich here that we're not taking care of. So New Orleans itself is living in a bowl. Okay, it's the island that Jefferson, it's a walled island now. Thomas Jefferson referred to buying the island of New Orleans. We are that island now. We were able to do a regional plan, which is a great benefit over looking only at one parish or one precinct. In each basin now, we looked at projects, ways that we can change identity as well as safety in these areas. And so if you look at these different basins, because the basins really don't care what you draw the political boundary to be, if you look at them, then what can we do with the space and the water that we have to improve them for safety and for quality of life and for the benefit of the people? So then St. Bernard, which is a tough case and worsening case in some ways, 35,000 people. Oops. So in St. Bernard, let's just look at one opportunity that's there. This is to let water in and go by the Chalmette battlefield, which is pretty historic if we focused on it and knew what we were trying to tell others about ourselves. And you take the water that is going through the canal system and you put in weirs and you develop alongside and you stabilize the banks so that as you progressively go to the wetland at the back, you have a new story, a new identity, a new course, and a new redevelopment mechanism. If you look at the lower Ninth Ward, which is also troubled, famous but troubled, has so much land, now we're able to get to the reality of, well, we could aggregate water at the back end. So you see the green areas that are occurring in that map at the back end, and then you see on this aerial bird's eye that either side of that, where the central wetlands unit is being restored by the Sewage and Water Board, or on the lower nine, it's still becoming more natural because the rebalancing of all this. We had the chance to be an ecological city that almost no other city in the world has. In my world, urbanist world, people talk about landscape urbanism. They talk about ecological urbanism. We're the case. So the Inner Harbor, you would think that having now Seabrook protecting us, and having this problem still with the lock at the bottom of that at the riverside, this needs to be reevaluated. So there needs to be a new water plan more specific to the Inner Harbor. There's already work underway for the airport. That's the regional airport, and that region is Baton Rouge. So this light land that you land on needs an approach that's unique to it. And the question again of what do you do with an airport? How do you store water in an airport? What species are at the airport? It's a great experiment. Dangerous experiment with birds, but that's a subject of worldwide interest. What do you do with Jefferson Parish? It's built 1950s, 60s. It's running out of kind of interest to the next generation. It's built up. It's all filled in. So what do you do? Well, you look at these, first of all, we're saying. You look at these canals you've built. You've got them. You have to drain, and you use them differently. This was an experiment we did with the DPW in Jefferson to raise the level of water in the canal and see what it does to rehydrate the soil. And, of course, it did what all the geologists, hydrogeologists project, which is it goes back in the soil and everything balances again. And then you would get a canal that would be of some value to live next to versus an eyesore that you fear to drive in. Same with the other canals. This is West Esplanade. These experiments in ugliness, don't need to be this way. We don't think much of ourselves or each other if we continue to build that way. So what do you do if you look at the west end here? There are very few places with limited subsidence. I ran into a man last night who said that in that very northwest corner, there have been 18 inches of subsidence in the last 10 years. So continue to drain it to build. Well, that's not going to be a good idea. However, if you look at the economic and hydrologic opportunity, you can store water and you can balance the groundwater and create safety, and you can create this new development condition out there. You need variety of real estate, as I see real estate people maybe in the audience. You can't sell the same thing to everybody. So you also can't continue to separate highways from water management in South Louisiana. DOTD does not put anything about a positive effect on the water balance with its highway projects. We pave underneath them. We need to incorporate water storage alongside them, as the Dutch do. We need to look at every place we can renovate. This is the airline corridor that becomes two-lane that runs into the city, has along it Elmwood, which is another experiment in paving it all. And how do you green Elmwood? How do you put the park back in Elmwood, with the Business Association now leading that effort? Or in New Orleans East, small commercial, what do you do between the storefront and the street edge to positively affect the water balance and the environmental aspect of that? Uptown New Orleans, everybody has a part to play in this drama. So how do you slow the water down as it comes down the slope off the Irish Channel, the Garden District, and so forth, toward the bowls that are there behind the ridge? We identified a series of interceptor streets with limited infrastructure that could be built in a way to catch the water and keep it from cascading down, so slowing that water down. I was in Boston at Harvard, and the planning director from D.C. asked me, have you patented these streets? No, should I? She said, we're going to build them, But are we going to build them in New Orleans? So I'm not in a room surrounded by New Orleanians, but we're going to spend $180 million this year on streets. How many are we going to build in a progressive way, and are we going to spend $180 million building them the old way? Because in innovation and experiment drive economy. So also small-scale things. I mean, this tree is now in the street. Well, if you extend the curb, you catch the water, the tree's happier, the kids too. There's a huge opportunity between Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish. The Monticello Canal is next to Holly Grove. There's a railroad corridor on the left side of that. And then when it rains hard, you get this bladder that more than doubles the safety aspect of that portion of the city because you can store so much water there. If you remember the Copenhagen case, they had that made this case because where their water aggregates, they then showed this as their floodway. This is not something that's unique to New Orleans. These are techniques that can be tried everywhere, but the Europeans are able to conceptualize and do it. We can conceptualize. When do we do it and create economic value for Holly Grove? Because Holly Grove is half occupied at best. Why aren't we making these investments in more than Corps of Engineers-driven concrete? We citizens have to demand this because it's going to go on. The paradigm is not strong enough without people demanding the change. So in Lakeview, $180 million worth of streets, right? Some of them are in Lakeview. Are we going to build them the same way? They absolutely will fall apart again, okay? The soils are too weak in Lakeview to build them that way. So we, with Bosch Schlaubers, conceived this series of floating streets that circulate and aggregate. This is just a couple of images. And basically keep the water there because you need the water table very high. Within about 2 feet of the surface, you need the water table there. Fixing streets doesn't necessarily make a place. Maybe improves the quality of life in the place, but how do you aggregate that back up? And here you see the 17th Street Canal on the left. You see the West End, which was the second canal, and what you can do there. Because this is a wholesale at every scale project that we can do. There's good news that Pontilli is finally going to move forward now. We've done this work to look at the empty lots. Because we have to get back to the empty lots, and what are we going to do with them? They're not a problem, really. They're an asset. Well, how do you pick up those little dots and put them into a system so that the people who redevelop and re-establish their lives there have this really great community asset that they care for? And last night there was a public meeting where they said, please, why can't we get going on this? And so everybody's excited that this now finally moves forward into construction. Well, bigger scale, more difficult, more valuable to the whole are the waterfronts in New Orleans. You know, somebody asked me yesterday, is this about Naples, Florida, or Fort Lauderdale? Well, no, not exactly, but it's about New Orleans, and what do we do with these? These are protected waterfronts, right? Now, with those closure structures, these are different conditions than they always were, where they were part of the hurricane system. You can see, if you'll stand there, if you'll go there, that the walls in some cases, in 2 of the cases, one, this is 17th, do not need to be there anymore. This gate never gets closed. So that wall is excessive and not needed there anymore. That's also proven by a lot of the calculations and the math we did, where you can see the green is the levee and then the wall is above it. On London Avenue, it's not safe to take it down yet. So there's a balance here of observation and calculation. We have to be really careful because in any of these projects, safety has to be first. But if you can then get those walls down, then you redevelop this, and you can imagine a much more prosperous area than that individual house behind that wall that you saw before. City Park is now, we're talking with them about how to improve their water system to circulate the water within the park to create a series of weirs so they can move that and so they can store more water in the park, which affects the neighborhood adjacent to it. Taking the walls down, of course, has another effect on the neighborhood next to it. I'm from plain dealing, as I said already. This is pretty much common thinking. This isn't rocket type science. I also was a history student, and I know that history has a powerful effect on humans. New Orleans, as I come closer to the end of this, New Orleans is driven by its past to its own detriment. But the first canal built was at the Lafitte Corridor, 1794, behind the French Quarter. Using that land that the public owns can take care of about 5/7 of the adjacent flooding problem without having to pump it, which means you don't spend the energy, you don't heat the world, you do everything you can do, which is all any of us should be expecting of ourselves. But we also improve the quality of life, and you get a redevelopment mechanism here. This is the case that the Friends of the High Line invited us, Mary Landrew and me and Jeff Abert, up to talk about, because this is big enough to drive the economy in a large way. This is not a small project. This is not an easy project for the city. Some risk, high reward. Basin Street, if you look there, look at the scale of the buildings to the left of it. Private money has to help pay for these public investments. We need a circulating system because without that, we don't have a healthy system, and we want to take advantage of everywhere we can to let this water move. It's stagnant in a 25-acre park, 28 behind Dillard in Gentilly, and if we just put a little water out of the canal, we create an urban wetland that would be a great place to go on Sunday and a way to redevelop that area around it. The story of this is back to really the heart. The nuns' congregation of St. Joseph were flooded. They were struck by lightning. They didn't sell their property to the developers who wanted it, and now they've pledged to put this 25-acre property in this water program. So it's a serious motive for me to do the right thing. It has great effect on the areas around it because one piece affects the ones around it. That's the way the water works. You have to work it all together. And we create this system that the site is intended to be developed for environmental education and athletics so that it can in fact flood at points, but the neighborhood does not flood, and people learn how to live with water, while the nuns get what they're after, which is systemic change. So next, what do we do? Well, one of the things we want to do next is look at the things that bifurcate the parishes. You know, the 17th Street Canal, which is that line on the left, and then the Industrial Canal. These are the things that are the rift and form the basins. So our next steps, we hope, are to involve people and agencies who are along these things to see how we can continue the cooperation. This is the 17th, brought up close, and all the factors that come into it. So these are still rich terrains. You know, you can study and you can study, and if you're good, you probably never quit studying and learning. Kids, right? Who are we doing it for? Why? They're the ones who have to carry this work forward. Because this is in our book, and it's the last piece of the vision document. It's what Rick Levin said for 20 years at Yale as president. He's never going to finish what he had to do at Yale. We're never going to finish this work. But you see, this was said a long time ago, first century. And if you do the right thing, maybe you can at least rest in peace. But it's not all about just being peace right now. You know, the world is active. We're no longer in isolated conditions. You know, McLuhan in the 60s identified the global village, and I don't find it to be wrong with the electric culture. We're all connected. Past is present, future's now. We have to engage now. In New Orleans still is connected to now. It's still connected through all these routes. And when I say New Orleans, I'm from plain dealing, right? I don't differentiate so clearly because I don't mean not Chalmette. I don't mean, in truth, not Baton Rouge, because if we had a train, I could get here more easily. But the river's still connecting, and the river's still carrying all this out, and it's still the driver of an economy. We have to balance that river. But we have to look at ourselves in time, okay? Last of this is we have to look at ourselves in time, and we have to deepen this quest. These are a series of 4 projects that my firm's worked on over the long period that it's been around. And you know, when this building was built in the 18th century, it was modern. It paid a lot of attention to the environment around it. This did not differentiate itself by style. They brought something from the West Indies. When the Custom House was built in 1848, it too was connected to commerce and the river. It was the big connection. This was when New Orleans was to become the biggest city in the United States, they thought. It was all about commerce, and somehow they connected the Nile and the Mississippi with this Egyptian style. We started to slip. We worked on this thing, the Fifth Circuit. We started to slip a bit, but this is the same architect who did most of the stuff at Yale in that period. Very good architect, James Campbell Rogers, but he was turning into historicism, and I'll joke and say, well, now you can see that the lawyers were coming into the discourse, right? Commerce was being impeded. And then when we did this building for the port, you know, it was moving toward the time, 90s. This is not now. It was 20 years ago. So the question really is, how do you stay in the present? How do you get in the present if you live in Louisiana, where we're so languid and looking backwards toward our past? We have to reconcile that and know and learn from it, but we have to live now. In Amsterdam, when they build a canal now, they build a canal and houses now. When they built a canal, though, in the past, they built a canal that was of that time. Amsterdam has always wanted to be modern, okay? So I close with this little example, which is to say that cities are practical, but cities are also mystical. So in Amsterdam in 1350 it was, I believe, there was something known as the miracle of Amsterdam. That was the scale of the city at that point. They still commemorate that. Oh, so 1345, I need a reminder. For 200 years, this host was there to worship. What happened was a man was dying, was given the host, and threw up. They shoveled it into the fire. It did not burn. They took it out the next morning, and the priest came, and everybody, it was documented, the best documented miracle almost ever, and it became something that people came from all over Europe to worship, healings, all this stuff that were reflected in this. So we know that Amsterdam was a place that trades, and they make money off trade. What I'm trying to say is it's also got a deeper root. And that deeper root you can't undervalue. And Louisiana has a deeper root. We have to rebalance the practical aspect of this, but we have to understand that there's something more worshipful about this. This drove pilgrims to Amsterdam. It became the eighth wonder of the world. It was the miracle of Amsterdam, right? And this sort of ethereal, inspirational, imaginative universe, we have to be willing to engage. So as we go forward, we have to go deeper. We have to engage the water with all its depth, with all its possibilities. And in conclusion, live with it. So thank you very much.